welcome to this episode of Career Shorts hosted by the Antibody Society, where we talk to a whole host of individuals from various sectors, including industry and academia, to gain their valuable insight into how PhD students and postdocs can navigate the tricky world after their studies end. In this episode, we're talking to Dr Giulia Pellizzari, Clinical Trials Manager and Lecturer at University College London. Now, let's get into this episode and we hope you enjoy. Giulia, welcome. Thank you for coming on to Career Shorts to speak with us today. Can we start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm Giulia. I am a research scientist by education, currently working as a trial manager and teaching lead at the Cancer Trial Centre at University College London. So my background is pretty much academic, very classic. So I've graduated my BSc and MSc in Italy, in the beautiful city of Trieste, in biomedical sciences and molecular medicine. And then I moved to London to join King's College to do my PhD in cancer immunology and immunotherapy. I then stayed for a brief period after my PhD to kind of wrap up my experiments and write up my publication. And in the meanwhile, I started to get involved in clinical trials, and then I moved to clinical trial management and clinical research. So this is why I'm here today.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it means to be a clinical trials manager?
Yes, so a clinical trials manager is someone who has a whole oversight of an entire research study or clinical trial. And depending on the type of organization that you are employed by, your job will look very different. So I personally work for UCL, who is the sponsor for many trials, and we oversee trials centrally. So I am responsible of all the aspects of the clinical trial at 360 degrees, from the setup of the study, the writing up of the protocol, the discussions about primary, secondary endpoint, and then I am responsible for the recruitment of patients, of the financial budget milestones. So basically, the oversight of everything, the regulatory compliance, the write-up of documents to the competent authorities, so MHRA, Research Ethics Committee. And I'm as well involved in everything that concerns the sample collections in the clinical trials. So I'm the first point of contact for patient treatment delivery, sample collection, sample analysis, and then I am involved in the later stages of clinical studies when it's time to wrap up the data, analyze the data, and prepare for a trial publication or a poster at a scientific conference.
That's wow, it really is. You're an octopus with 8 legs functioning in so many different aspects. That's incredible. I mean, I'd love to ask you, like, what does a typical day look like for you? But that doesn't seem to be a typical day from what you've just said.
No, exactly. You're right. It is actually a very varied job. And again, it depends who you're employed by. For example, if you are a clinical trial manager in the NHS at a specific hospital, you might be responsible only for the studies that are at that participating hospital. If you are a trial manager at a CRO, contract research organization, or in pharma, it's a very different job. Again, I'm lucky enough to be in academia, and that means that we oversee the entire process. But if you're a clinical trial manager in a pharma company, for example, you might oversee just one of the many aspects that I've just talked to you about. So there isn't a specific day in my job. I would say every day is different, and that's what I really like about it.
But I think that's really exciting because it seems like if you're someone who's interested in maybe migrating away more from the day-to-day research, but are interested in working in clinical trials and that therapy translation, depending on what your interests are, if you want to specialize and focus on one thing, or if you are a jack of all trades and you work across the whole spectrum, it looks like clinical trials isn't one unique box. You can, as you've said, depending if you work on the NHS or in academia, you can fit to your needs as you wish.
Absolutely, yes. And that's why I like being a clinical trial manager at UCL in academia, because it provides you still with that openness about different possibilities of being a part of different projects and different aspects of the study. Because coming, as you know, coming from academia and coming from the lab, you shuffle between being actually the scientist in the lab to being the finance administrator, to be the porter of CO2, bottles, so to be the one who takes care of the supplies. So again, even as a scientist, you're a jack of all trades, and I managed still to translate this into clinical trials. So that's the beauty of clinical trials in academia. Yeah.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit about how clinical trials work? You said that are you working on multiple projects at once? Although it sounds like it's quite full on just handling one clinical trials, given your multitude of roles. So how does it work?
Again, it depends. So
Yes.
You could be a manager who oversees a portfolio of trials, but that is only possible if the trials that you oversee are actually a very slow-paced trials. So perhaps there are trials that have closed recruitment and they're now in the follow-up stage, which means that you don't have any potential incident at the hospital where a patient is being overdosed or underdosed, or there are problems with sample collections, because all of that part is now closed. So in that case, you could oversee many trials altogether, but there have been instances where I've been allocated to one trial only because it was a high-risk trial. There was sample collection intense. There were many registrations of patients every single day. So again, it depends on which type of trial you work in. The higher the risk the trial, the less chance you have to be involved in other projects, and that might be just your only baby for a number of months and years.
Cool. And do you work with a multitude of other clinical trial managers within UCL, or presume, because as you said, yeah.
So the way our clinical trials unit is organized, we are organized depending on the cancer setting. So we have different teams depending on the type of cancer that we take care of. So I'm in the group that takes care of solid tumor clinical trials only. And I would say we are in a team, but we work independently. So we have senior managers and senior group leads that do oversee our work, but our trials are, I would say, for a single trial manager. So your work is very, very independent, but you do oversee the work of data managers who are allocated to different trials, and they're responsible of samples of data collections and data cleaning, data queries. So you oversee that work for your specific trials.
Yeah, awesome. And I thought it was really interesting because looking at your LinkedIn page, it seems that in addition to your role as a clinical trials manager, which again seems like a full-on plate in itself, you're also now lecturing. How did you get involved in that? And how does this fit in with what's likely your principal role as a clinical trials manager?
So I kind of pushed to be involved in that because I've always loved teaching. I've always loved training people. Even when I was working in the lab, I've always liked this collaborative approach to any type of project. So I was actually asked to contribute to one of the modules at UCL after a year that I've been here. And that was a great experience because at UCL, they have a specific master's in clinical trials. So you can actually learn and graduate into a degree that's specialized for clinical trials, and you can learn about methodology about that. And after that, actually, I understood that I liked it a lot. So I asked within my unit whether it was possible to find a role that could reflect my passion for trial management, but also could involve a lot of teaching. And I was lucky enough to find this, and now, yes, I'm basically split half and half between taking care of clinical studies and teaching undergraduate and postgraduate students at UCL, as well as giving out pastoral care, so being a personal tutor for students, and taking care of internal training of the unit as well. So again, multiple tasks and very varied role.
That's really interesting, and I think it's it doesn't seem like it's a common opportunity to be able to kind of split your time like this. So
it's
like,
not.
Yeah, but it's, at the same time, it's
no, yeah, I think it's academia. I think it's again because of it's being a clinical trials manager in academia. So having again a full range of opportunities that you might want to reach out to, which perhaps wouldn't be possible to have in a private environment.
And kind of speaking of clinical trials, and you working as both a lecturer and a clinical trials manager, would you be able to tell us what was the decision behind working in clinical trials after your PhD?
So actually, this came from an opportunity that I was given during my PhD in the lab that I was working at King's College London. Basically, we were lucky enough to see the whole drug development process happening in front of us, because one of our monoclonal antibodies actually managed to receive approval for a first-in-man, first-in-class phase 1 clinical trial. And so I was asked if I could help with the sample collection and the sample analysis for the exploratory endpoints of that clinical trial. And so I accepted it, and it was a great opportunity, and I learned a lot about how different it is to perform data analysis and data collection for something that is a clinical trial compared to what I was used to in my day-to-day work as a PhD student in a classic research project in academia. And so I was really fascinated by that. And after that, I thought that I wanted to know more about the whole process that was behind. And that's how I tried to translate to clinical research.
Yeah. Is there anything, so for example, is there anything that you would have done in addition to, so if you hadn't had this opportunity, or even in addition to this opportunity, kind of knowing now where you are, is there anything that you would have done during a PhD to kind of put you in a better position to work in clinical trials or to get some exposure into it?
So if I was a PhD student right now, or if I had to give advice to PhD students who might find themselves in the same position, I would say be proactive to find opportunities out there on top of your PhD project. It will be an added effort, because on top of your working hours as a PhD student, which normally are already a lot, you will have to find time to perhaps get involved into another clinical trials project that perhaps is run by a lab that's right next to yours, and also trying to look for training opportunities in terms of training courses, because many universities actually offer free training courses about how to write a clinical trial protocol, or how it is to be a clinical trial manager, what it means pharmacovigilance in the clinical research. So go out there, be proactive, and find training courses and opportunities that might not be as visible. But yes, that's what I would have done basically if I didn't have that opportunity.
And you also mentioned just earlier on in your previous answer that, for example, a master's in clinical trials that UCL, for example, hosts. That seems also something, I mean, maybe for a PhD student, getting experience, as you said, little short courses and things like that is probably more useful. But perhaps the master's is something that's quite useful for someone who's listening, for example, that's doing their undergraduate degree for example, or has done a postdoc and they want to do a master's part-time and they want to get that experience. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the students that we actually have in our master in clinical trials have a very different backgrounds amongst them. So we have students coming directly from their undergraduate, or we have actually doctors who have done their medical training and they want to be up to date with clinical trials methodology. And so they come to our master, or we have people working in trials already, such as nurses or trial practitioner who want a specific degree and they want to be trained appropriately 360 degrees. So definitely that is a great opportunity. But for people who already have a lot of experience in the lab, such as PhD students, definitely short training courses, I would say they are more than sufficient, together with perhaps a practical experience, to hypothetically move one day to the clinical trials field.
Would you be able to now kind of transition over and to say how undertaking your PhD really put you in a good position as you're working now as a clinical trials manager and as a lecturer, and especially, I guess, the development of those non-scientific kind of soft skills?
Yes, those famous transferable skills that everyone was talking about while I was doing my PhD, and I was just focused on the experimental skills. Actually, they were right, and it came out they are really, really important. I would say that in general, during a PhD, will leave you with a scientific imprinting that will give you an added asset in every single job that you will decide to do, even removed from science. So basically, I have this scientific imprinting and this mindset that now I cannot take away from my, daily commitments in my role. So in everything that regards reviewing, for example, the clinical trial protocol, I will always have a more scientific eye into this, or it provided me with an added value because I can avoid to send out documents for review to the central laboratories, for example, because I am aware and I have experience, I have enough experience to be able to review them myself. So it helps also in from that point of view, in the sense that I can do them myself rather than having to ask for time to more people for that. So it is definitely helpful, and it provides you with a mindset from where new ideas will stem very easily for new trials, new projects, new collaborations, and normally provides you with a great professional network as well. That's always useful to have in any professional role.
And were there any misconceptions as you kind of moved from working in a more research role into a clinical trials role? Were there any misconceptions that you found before you entered clinical trials? And
misconceptions, I would say that,
or challenges,
yeah,
whichever.
Yeah, I would say that people might think that working clinical trials or being, as I said before, trials manager, it means exactly the same regardless of where you work, but actually they could be two very different types of careers. So, and I didn't know that until I started to work in this stage of clinical trials and in this environment, which is still academia, but I interfaced with other trial manager who are instead working in the private sector, and we found out that we're basically doing two very different jobs, although our title is the same. And for example, the added opportunity of teaching, I didn't know that would have ever been possible, being a trial manager, not being working in the lab only, or being a research associate or fellow. So that's definitely one of the things that surprised me the most. So yeah, in a positive way.
And what's been something that what do you love about being a clinical trials manager? What's something about your day-to-day role and being a lecturer on the side, like what gets you out of bed in the morning?
I think what's really great is that having been a scientist in the lab, so having seen the earlier stages of the drug development process, because in the end of the day, that's what we all want to do, unless of course you work in basic research, but I was involved in translational research. So the final aim is to translate a product into the clinics, is to actually being able to see the other extreme now, and being able to see how those many years of hard work in the lab are now being delivered to the patients, and they're actually making a difference. So that's a great and rewarding feeling that you have overseeing a clinical study. And together with that, being lecturing students at UCL, it means that I'm able to transfer their hands-on experience in clinical trials into my teaching, and vice versa. While I lecture and teach, I have always to keep myself up to date with research breakthroughs and new methodology in statistics, etc. And I'm able to feed that back when I work as a trial manager. So it's a nice and symbiotic circular motion that you have going on there, and it's really great and very dynamic.
I have to say, kind of hearing you talk, first of all, with so much passion and just love about what you do. First, because I didn't know very much about clinical trials going into this, and kind of hearing, especially an academic clinical trials role, it sounds very varied and very interesting. And especially, as you said, I'm working on more of a translational PhD myself, and so I'm interested in that aspect of taking something from the lab bench into patient care and impact. So it just sounds really, really, really exciting. And it seems like there's lots of opportunities within clinical trials and all sorts. I mean, beyond even working as a clinical trials manager, it seems like there's a huge scope of opportunity.
Yes, there is. And I think this is one of the things that surprised me the most when I was hearing about clinical trials before. I thought it was a very mundane job, very removed from science and very removed from the environment, the dynamic environment of academia. But it is not if you work in clinical trials in academia, that's for sure.
Yeah. So if we could kind of wrap things up a little bit now, would you be able to give any last advice for PhD students, postdocs, undergrads, or if you like, is there anything that you would have liked to have told your younger self now in the shoes that you're in now?
I would tell them to not close any door necessarily. So leave all of your doors open. Some of them will close by themselves automatically over the years, but if you're still not sure and you're interested in a lot of different areas and a lot of different aspects of science, then do not close any doors. And as I said before, be proactive in finding opportunities. There might even be a 1 day or 2 day opportunity to shadow someone working in a different role or something that you're interested in, and just do it. Take that time on top of your PhD, take a day off from writing your thesis and invest that time for your future, because it is normal not to know what to do sometimes, but explore as much as you can and then make a decision. In terms of telling myself something, I've been asked this question before and my answer stays the same. So I don't think I would have anything in particular to tell my younger self, because I enjoyed the ride. I'm still enjoying it with its ups and lows. It was still a great ride, and I would do everything again the way that I did it.
That's awesome advice. Thank you.
You're welcome.